Hi everyone, this is our channel, Around My Story. Please like, share and subscribe.
I adore detective adventures and solving puzzles that others can't. I'm crazy about this. I love challenges and mysteries. I'm Ramon, but my father's nickname for me is Megamind. I'm 14 years old, and I'm typically ranked number one in my class every year. I have become famous for solving riddles. Many comers have tried to unseat me, but all have failed. I love to examine minute details. But let me get on with telling you my story. One hot summer, we had just finished our exams at school and were going on summer break. So I organized a trip to the beach with my friends. Beach weather is amazing. Clear skies, cool ocean breezes, sand, and sun. Just amazing. One day, before my beach trip, my mother handed me a letter from my grandmother. I was surprised and thought it was a little weird because Granny owned a hotel in the surrounding area nearby. It had wonderful views all around it. I had opened the letter, which read, "Dear Ramon, how are you? I hope you're enjoying your summer break. Would you mind spending a couple of days with me? I have a serious matter that I would like to discuss with you. Granny." Initially, I thought that it was probably some silly matter, but then my inner voice told me that it might be important. I was conflicted between going on my beach trip or visiting my granny. I decided to visit Granny first. She was family after all, so off I went. Though my grandmother lived in a beautiful area, the closer I got to the hotel, the more my inner voice was nagging me. When I arrived at the hotel, Granny was waiting for me. She smiled and hugged me. I had missed her so much. She had company. Raul, her maintenance man, and Malika, her housekeeper and assistant. There weren't any guests in the hotel at the time, and I asked her why. Her face changed, and she said that was what she wanted to speak to me about. So we went to her room to talk. She then proceeded to tell me that the hotel was haunted. "Haunted?" I exclaimed. "What makes you think that?" Granny said, "The hotel has evil spirits that frighten the guests at night." I didn't want to believe it, but I knew Granny was a rational person. I suspected there was more to this than meets the eye, so I decided to investigate this intriguing mystery. On my first night at the hotel, I waited until midnight. Then I lit a candle and walked through the halls of the hotel. There were photos on the wall, and I could hear whispering and the rustle of the leaves outside. It was a little spooky and unsettling, and made my blood run cold. Suddenly, I heard laughing on both sides of the hotel, and a shadow passed quickly in front of my eyes. Unnerved, I quickly returned to my room, where soon afterwards I heard something scratching on my door. I kept thinking to myself, I am not afraid. I am not afraid. Then the door began opening slowly. I saw a hand on the doorknob. Then the owner of the hand came into view. It was a cloaked, headless man holding a candle. I fainted. The next day, I woke up to find Granny and Malika standing beside me. Granny told me that I had been sleeping a long time. I asked what had happened, and they told me they heard me scream and came to my aid. When they found me, I was unconscious on the floor. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. It was Raul bringing me a drink. That was when I noticed something strange about Raul's face. It was emotionless. Then I glanced at his hands as I accepted the drink from him. That night, I again walked around the hotel. I found some steps at the end of a corridor that led to the basement. Down in the basement, I opened a maintenance door and found a tape recorder and a pile of clothes on a table. Suddenly, the lights went out. I was groping around in the dark and trying to find my way back when I heard the laughing again. Still, I continued stumbling ahead through the dark. I stepped on an electrical line and tore it off the wall. I returned to my room. My door opened slowly. I was hiding behind the door. I grabbed the loose electrical detonator and touched it to the doorknob. It was live, and I heard a grunt from the owner of the hand on the other side of the door as he or she was shocked. And I heard him or her fall to the floor. It took me a while to find the electrical panel, but I managed to get the lights back on. When I did, I found Raul laying unconscious on the floor next to the doorknob that I had electrified. I called Granny and Malika down to the basement. Granny asked what had happened. I replied, "Granny, you really need to screen your employees better. Raul was your ghost." Granny looked shocked and asked me what made me think that. I explained that the hand on my drink today was the same hand I saw on the headless ghost that opened my hotel room door the night before. I also found tools, a tape recorder, and some ghost clothes down here in the basement. In addition, I found the earphones that had been placed around the hotel. Granny was shocked. Raul woke up about that time, and she grilled Raul. "Why are you scaring all my guests away, Raul?" He said, "This hotel used to belong to my family, but you bought it from my grandfather. Well, I wanted it back. Please forgive me." Malika said, "We have to call the police." But I said, "No, wait, I have an idea. Let's renovate and reopen the hotel with a new name. The Haunted Hotel. Our advertising slogan will be, spend a night in a haunted hotel." Raul can do his ghost thing with the whispers and the laughing. Why, he can even flicker the lights off and on at a random time once or twice a night just to give the hotel a spooky atmosphere. The idea proved to be a big hit. The haunted hotel attracted many tourists and Granny's business prospered. I had a nice holiday and still managed to fit in my trip to the beach on my summer break.
Don't we all feel special sometimes? I grew up in an orphan house. I'm not trying to pretend that there was anything special about it, but I grew up with this nagging voice inside my head telling me how special I am and that my life will eventually turn upside down. It turned out I was not being delusional or anything. What happened to me was every foster child's dream. If only I knew what my future held for me. My mom, dad, and twin sister committed suicide in 1992. I was saved by my extended family, only to get abandoned later. I was disowned, not because two of the wealthiest families in the city couldn't raise me, but because I was a curse for their reputation. My mom and dad were not married, and that brought them so much shame until they took their own lives. Fast forward few months later, one day I woke up at a children's home. I'm an orphan now. I have absolutely no memories of my parents, or even my twin sister, but I do remember my extended family very well. They gave me up when I was 6 years old. My uncle is an extremely rich businessman. He was never really bad to me. In fact, he put me in what you can call a fancy home. Although he promised to visit me every weekend, he never did. I was put in a medium-sized room with 4 other girls, Rosaline, Claire, Bella, and me, Rachel. They were all dressed in clean nightgowns, but they were all the same color, pale green. Mrs. Milton, our guardian, gave me a similar gown to put on. It felt as if I was admitted into kids' military. Our hair was always put up in a tight bun. We all looked the same. Mrs. Milton was not the kindest person you could come across, but she wasn't evil either. The house was divided into 2 sections, one for the boys and one for the girls. The only time we met the boys was in the outside building, which was some sort of a school. We took a few classes every day, and to be honest, we had some really good teachers. I always sat next to a boy called Nate. I thought he was super smart, and he always helped with my math homework because numbers were never really my field of expertise. We eventually became really good friends. Whenever I went back to the room, all the girls were too occupied with their toys, and they were all good friends already. It felt like I was an outsider. However, a few months later, I became the alpha of the group. Don't get me wrong, this is not another Oliver Twist story. We used to pull pranks on each other all the time, and we had a really good laugh. I mean, being in a foster home is not exactly a vacation, so we made the best out of a bad situation. When the girls would go to sleep at night, I would go fake sleeping until Mrs. Milton had gone to sleep as well. Then I would stare out that tiny, teeny window and start counting the stars one by one. I named one after my dad, one after my mom, one after my twin sister, and finally, one after Nate. I would stay up all night long daydreaming until I fell asleep. Mrs. Milton would wake us up around 6 a.m. to have breakfast and go to class. It went on like that for years and years. Every day seemed exactly like the other, except on the weekends, which wasn't really much of a weekend. It only meant we were allowed to eat dessert. I have always been an extremely curious little girl, and the reason Nate and I grew so close was because he was a curious boy as well. We had no idea about the outside world. We had so many unanswered questions, and sometimes we would make up answers to tame our brains. The girls had relatives visiting them during the weekend, but I would stay in my room. Sometimes I cried, and sometimes I shut my eyes close and tried to imagine what my mom looked like. One day during science class, Nate asked me who visits me on the weekend. I never said anything back. I pretended that I didn't even hear him. But in a moment of extreme confusion and sadness, I wrote something down on a piece of paper and passed it to him. It said, "Let's get out of here." We were 12 years old at the time. I didn't care about the consequences at all. All I cared about was getting outside of here and exploring what was happening in the outside world. I wanted to go back to my uncle, even if he didn't want me. Nate looked at the paper, folded it into half, and he freaking swallowed the paper, and he just nodded his head at me. I wasn't sure what he meant by the nod until at midnight. While I was looking at the stars I befriended for years now, I heard the slip of a paper under the door. I quickly got up and the paper said, "Meet me at the school building in 5 minutes." I slowly opened the door and ran downstairs. Nate and I stood there awkwardly, not knowing what to do. We started discussing a runaway plan. But seriously though, what could two kids do to escape a fully guarded huge building? We were smarter than any of you would think. For the next week, we studied every movement happening around the place. When security guards changed their shifts, which teachers left class early, we even memorized the times when Mrs. Milton had to use the bathroom. We had a solid plan. At the end of the week, on Friday, we had history class, and the teacher always left a few minutes early. At the same exact time, security guards changed their shifts, and Mrs. Milton took about 3 to 4 minutes to come downstairs and walk us back to our rooms. That was it. That was the moment I have been looking for all along. We passed by the guard's back and we ran and ran like there was no tomorrow. After a few blocks, we were out of breath. We were two kids dressed exactly alike